Welcome. One of the things that we'll be talking about in the hips and knees module is the connection that we can do to align ourselves all the way from the foot, the lower leg, knee, hip area to the pelvis. We can shorten that to be described as the foot to pelvis connection. And one of the best ways we can start that process of connecting foot to pelvis is to start with the feet. So we're going to do a few exercises, a few ways to enliven this foot to pelvis connection right now. Now, one of the first things we can think about is how do we balance opposite forces or opposite effects together? So we can think of those being up and down. So we press down, we root down to rise up. Many of us are familiar with that. We can also think of a pressing in or a tugging out or an internal rotation balanced with an external rotation. Now, let's take a little look at the feet and see how we can start to explore this. So what I'd like you to do first is just lift up all your toes, and my fingers always go with my toes when I do this. So go ahead, lift up all your toes, and then just gently spread them all down. So just sort of feeling, okay, how is it to have my feet, my toes connecting with the earth? And now what I'd like you to do is again lift up all the toes, but then press down just the big toes, just the big toes. And what you might begin to feel is a little internal rotation or a little sort of rolling in with the foot, almost like a little bit of rolling in and a little bit of rolling in with the thighs. Okay, so you almost get a little like knock-kneed with that, yeah? And then go ahead, lift up all the toes. And then let's try the opposite of that. Just allow the baby toes themselves. Just allow the baby toes themselves. And can you feel that sort of rolling out with the knees a little bit as you do? Those can be your markers. A little bit of rolling out with the thighs as well. You can even sort of feel into here, the sides of the hips to feel, okay, how is it when I press down through the baby toes? Other toes lifted, that rolling out. How is it when I press down just with the big toes, that rolling in? And you'll actually feel this, hey, in your outer hips. So let's see how can we use that opposite action to find balance, that wonderful space in between. And here's what these two actions are first that I want to talk about. One is that big toe connection. So pressing down through big toes. So that's first action. And then second action would be tugging out through the heels. Now, where do I mean by that? Here's where I mean, particularly if you press down, so you can lean over or you can just lift your foot up. So you can feel here that ankle bone, that outer ankle bone. That's your lateral malleoli bone. So I want you to imagine that just below that lateral malleoli, that sticky, outy ankle bone, that you could feel like those heels, outer heels, tug to the outer corner of the mat. Now take your hands onto your hips as you do that and tug to the outer corner of the mat. Now, you'll probably feel some action in here because this actually changes the way that the thigh bones, the femur bones, sit in the hip socket. And then for some of us as well who have a little bit more mobility, particularly in the SI or sacroiliac joint, that's back here where the sacrum and the ilium come together. You might even feel as you tug through those outer heels a little bit of movement in that SI joint. In fact, for some of us, it's quite helpful because we feel a little bit more spaciousness there. So we're going to try those two actions together, pressing down through big toes and tugging through the outer heel. We can think of that as a diagonal connection of the foot, and that diagonal line goes from big toe to outer heel. Now, a great way that I find to work with people with this is the block between the thighs. Just a nice way for them to feel that little gathering to center. So I'm taking a block between my thighs, and you can choose whatever width works best for you. I'm going to go to my narrowest setting here. And sometimes this thick block, this is a 4-inch block, doesn't work so well. It's better to use a smaller chip foam block. So I'm placing it between my thighs. I'm lifting up all the toes, and then here I'm going to let just the big toes go down, and then the other toes start to float down. Now I'm going to feel a little pressing in with the block. Now, a great way to connect with this is not just that pressing in, that squeezing of the block, but I want you to also imagine that you could actually press the block behind you. So, real internal rotation. So, a way to imagine that, and if you look at me from the side, you'll see that, is pressing the block behind you. You'll get a little bit more of a sticky, outy sort of butt, like you'll actually increase that anterior tilt of the pelvis a little bit. And many of us, in fact, need that because we tend to be a bit more posteriorly tilted. So I'm pressing in with the thighs. I'm feeling like that block presses back behind me. And then what I might feel as a natural consequence of that is that tugging through the outer heels. Now, if you don't feel that naturally, just from that squeezing of the block and the pressing back, really actively feel like that area below the lateral malleoli, those ankle bones, tug out to the side. So you feel, yeah, a little bit of that connection. Now, each of us are different based on what our natural tendencies of our posture are. So it's not necessarily a 50-50 split. For me, certainly what I find is if I do too much of that pressing in with the block, is I feel a little tightness in the low back, and it actually helps me to feel more space to do a little bit more of that ratio tugging out through the heels. So I might be sort of like 60-40 in favor of the heels tugging out, sometimes even maybe 70-30. Now, it's not important for you to know your exact ratio, just to know that different people are going to have different amounts of pressing in and tugging out. So take some time to play with this, and we'll play with this a little bit more when we come together in the module.